Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another couple of hours of WildEarth's Africam live at the Waterhole with me, Ben Coley. I'll be looking after you for the next couple of hours and hopefully hearing lots and lots from you, as I have done over the last couple of days. So we would love to hear from you. Send in your comments, your questions, anything you'd like to see, anything you'd like to discuss. And as always, I will do my absolute best to answer any questions that come in. Remember, this is live and interactive. We do want to hear from you. You can watch on our app, you can register on our website, watch on YouTube, and yeah, we'll see what nature has to show us over the next couple of hours. We've had a couple of great days for those of you who join us regularly. Lots and lots of elephants yesterday having a drink and interacting. We were discussing communication amongst elephants and various other aspects of their behavior. And of course, probably the highlight of the last few days was the crocodile eating a snake in Cow Waterhole in Madikwe. But we've started today in Okukoyu out in Namibia, and a herd of relatively well camouflaged zebras in this type of terrain. Very, very nice to see. Well, apparently we're struggling a little bit with the connection to Okukoyu, so we're going to shoot back to South Africa and to Djuma and the surrounding area, see if anything's happening at the Djuma Waterhole this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are, of course. Looks like a nice breeze blowing there today. Of course, we would expect that as the seasons are changing, coming into autumn. We do normally have some windier months as the seasons change. Of course, the scene of many incredible wildlife encounters over my years of doing work with Safari Live out of Djuma. I know this dam very, very well and have seen some incredible sights here. Elephants swimming, hippos playing with sticks, various different leopards, lions and hyenas interacting on the shores. Amazing how much happens. You could write an entire soap opera just for one of these locations. It seems to be fairly quiet this morning thus far. Interesting to see by flitting between all the different camera feeds that we have. Oh, we got there, looks like a little impala hiding in the shade. The difference in the vegetation, if you compare it to what we were looking at yesterday up in Zimbabwe and Vic Falls, you can see how much drier the vegetation is up there. Even though we're coming into the autumn months now, there's still some green left in Djuma. Other places seem to be turning a little faster. You can see that looks like a russet bush willow, or I think we call it a mouse-eared bush willow now, just to the left of the Impala, just beginning to turn the colours there, losing the chlorophyll. The tree having sealed off some of those leaves to stop wasting energy when the sun is no longer as potent for photosynthetic purposes. Those leaves will slowly start to change colour and expose those beautiful reds and orange that we expect to see this year before dropping onto the ground. The tree will store those remaining nutrients down in the roots and wait for the longer daylight hours and the moisture associated with summer. Just a lone Impala ram enjoying the shade. Of course, usually more associated in sort of bachelor groups, groups of males that are hanging around this time of year. We're no longer in breeding season, of course. All the females will be, excuse me, all the females pregnant at the moment will be expecting the influx of Impala lambs over about 3 or 4 months' time. Normally around about November, late October, they might start coming through. So no real breeding opportunities for the males at the moment, because all the females generally fall pregnant during what we call the rut, which is finished now. That's more sort of April time, so just at the end of the rut. And I suppose we may still have some activity, some rutting activity from the males, because normally then they will separate, hold their own individual territories and hope to attract some females. And you do have this idea sometimes of this fallacy of female impalas, the impala ewes being able to hold their young back for times that are better suited for them from an environmental perspective. We now know, of course, that's not true, but you do get some late breeding, which then accounts for the later arrival of some lambs. So possibly that male holding on to a very nice territory there by the waterhole, in the hope of some last-minute breeding opportunities. A pair of Birchall's starlings. A couple of messages coming through. Thanks for sending those in already. Casper, happy Tuesday from Milwaukee. Absolutely likewise to you and everybody else as well. Great to know again that we are communicating with people from all over the globe. And we'll see what today has in store for us. But nice way to start with these beautiful iridescent starlings. And I see, Christopher, you've asked a question. Does climate change how early impalas start or end their rut season? Christopher, that's a very, very good question. But I think it's one that we won't really have the answer to yet. One of the big problems with climate change is that it happens, or it is happening quickly, and nature generally takes a little bit of time to adapt to these changes. And that's one of the big issues with human influence, is we are affecting the planet on a far, far faster basis than would otherwise be happening naturally. Remember, the world does go through cycles. We've seen it over millions of years. Ice ages come and go. But because of all of the activities of man and the chemicals that we've pumped into the atmosphere over the years, things are changing very, very quickly. And nature is going to struggle to adapt quickly enough to keep up. So currently, certainly during my 20 years or so of experience, the rut happens at around about the same time every year, March, April. And that hasn't changed as yet. But if there is a very obvious sort of seasonal change at the time in the year that the rains normally arrive or dissipate changes, you might see over a longer period that the animals will adapt and take that into account. But a few years is not really long enough for animals to completely change their behavior in that regard. So it's a very contentious question, and one of the biggest problems with climate change is that things are happening on a far faster rate than they would normally do so. And evolution takes time. One of the reasons that many species are struggling. We do see some animals that whose behaviour has changed and has changed relatively quickly. A good example of that, one that springs to mind, is that of the jackal. We think of jackals now as far more nocturnal creatures, or crepuscular, as we would call them, which means more active at dawn and dusk. But go back, a century or so, and jackals were far more active during the daytime, and they have changed their behaviour, their habits over a relatively short time span in terms of generations of animals in response to pressure from humans because of hunting pressure from farmers and other problems that humans have produced. Jackals have relatively quickly changed their behavior to avoid people. They're now far more active when there are less people around. Okay, relatively quiet over on Juma, but I think we're going to try our luck up on the eastern side of Madikwe Game Reserve in the northwest of South Africa. Let's head up to Jamala's waterhole camera. And we have an elephant. Look at the difference in the terrain. Much drier in the northwest, of course. Looks like a young elephant bull enjoying this waterhole all to himself. But where there is one, there is often another one. So I'm assuming another young bull. Interesting to see whether we have any interaction between the two of them. But again, I think this waterhole is big enough. We shouldn't have any concerns. And these do look like young bulls. We saw a huge elephant bull having a drink at Tau yesterday. Much, much more bulk. Taller, wider, much broader across the trunk area. Good ways to tell the size or estimate the age of an elephant. These two look like very much sort of late teenagers, early 20s perhaps. Dipping his feet in the water. We're going to have a swim. Ah, oh, brilliant. Paddling elephants. If I was an elephant, I would always be in the water. So often we see them just standing on the edge and having a drink. It's a much better idea to get into the water if you're trying to cool down. If we're really lucky, maybe we'll see one have a bit of a lie down and a splash around in the water. You don't see it very often. A little bit of communication there. The smaller one just using the tip of his trunk to touch the bigger one. A bit of mutual respect. Oh, backing into him. Oh, we are. Yes, have a roll around. Amazing. People up. Full on elephant spa day. How awesome is that? Happy animals. Swim come soon for a bit of a snorkel. Of course, elephants are very competent swimmers in deep water if they need to be. They do float, and surprisingly comfortable paddling along, doggy paddle style. What a beautiful scene this is. I see you've had a question come through from Gina. Good afternoon, Gina. Wanting to know whether old elephant bulls remove themselves from those bachelor herds when they are coming towards the end of their life. Sort of inadvertently, yes, they do. The really old bulls you'll often find as being solitary. And generally speaking, with all elephants, and this includes elephant cows as well, you'll often find that older elephants, they will hang out in particular areas. Not that there is sort of an old age home where all elephants end up, but it's all to do with their ability to helping this one get out of the water, to digest food. Remember, the biggest problem with elephants is they don't really die of old age so much. Unfortunately, elephants generally succumb to what is ultimately malnutrition, and that's all to do with the structure of their teeth. So elephants have 6 sets of teeth throughout their lifetime, and when they get their last set around about sort of the late 30s, early 40s, after 15, 20 years of constant grinding of plant material to get enough fuel into that huge engine, those teeth wear down, and they're forced to find areas with better suited vegetation for what they're able to chew on. So they'll generally end up in wetter areas, so close to rivers, swampy areas and the like. Are you going to get out? Do you need a hand? I think this one's going to be okay. And ultimately, when they do run out of petrol, for want of a better word, it'll be in one of those areas. And that, of course, has given us this whole idea of elephant graveyards. This, again, this fallacy that elephants go to a specific place to pass on. The reasoning behind that is a lot of these elephants do succumb to Mother Nature close to water bodies, and then if there is a flood, all those bones get picked up, carried downstream, and if there's a big bend, a big meander in the river, quite often multiple bones will be deposited on that bend because their momentum carries them onto the shore, and then the water dies back. And people used to find multitudes of bones from different animals in the same spot, and that's what led to this whole idea of elephant graveyards. Okay, well, that was a pretty awesome way to start the afternoon. It's not every day you have some elephants playing around in the mud like that. But let's stay in Madikwe. Sounds like we may have some more elephants up at Tau, so let's pop over there. Oh, what a beautiful big kudu bull. Not often you get to see them out in the open. A nice big elephant cow there in the foreground. Very likely the matriarch, I would think, just looking at her size compared to the rest. Although it's not always the biggest, but generally the oldest female, one with the most knowledge, will be the head of the group. that very characteristic angular forehead of an elephant cow, very sort of square forehead as opposed to the males, which are generally more rounded in shape. Generally, say nature is a big fan of the rule of thumb. There are, of course, exceptions to every rule. But you can see her mammary glands under her front legs, or we could do momentarily. Pretty much a giveaway. Of course, elephants like the hyraxes that we sometimes see down at Stony Point and in other spots. Elephants, hyraxes, primates, some of the few animals that have their mammary glands, including us, of course, under their front legs as opposed to in between their back legs. Yes, we seem to may have a little bit of reptilian activity down at Stony Point since we mentioned it, so we may well come back to the elephants, but let's go and see if we can identify this mysterious lizard at Stony Point. There he is. Now, I have to say, this is not an area of the country that I frequent very often, so I'm probably going to hold off on suggesting exactly what species this is, because there are a huge diversity of lizards in different areas of the country in South Africa. We're now down in the Western Cape, so it's hard to know for sure what that would be. Possibly one of the flappers. I very much question if you know exactly what. Just enjoying a little bit of sunshine there. Lovely spot for the lizards to be living in the crevices underneath those rocks. Perfect place to keep out of reach of any potential predators. You can see the dopey look in his or her eyes as well. Just very much enjoying it. So you just see the nictitating membrane whipping across the eyelid there. You can see, like all reptiles, there's very sort of bony eyelids just to help to protect those eyes. We see it very much in crocodiles as well, to protect the eyes. 3 eyelids, top, bottom, and that lubricating, nictitating membrane as well. See him breathing. Conspirate Hank, you're asking, are there any venomous lizards or are snakes the only reptiles with that adaptation? Conspirate Hank, let me have a think. Other than snakes, the one that jumps into my mind is the monitor lizard, which has relatively recently, scientifically speaking, been discovered to have a sort of a venomous saliva. If you do get bitten by a monitor lizard, there is a chance to have a reaction to it. It's not particularly potent, but it can have an effect. I'm not sure the type of venom that has been identified there. I remember hearing about it recently. But I couldn't give you any specifics. Other than that, I can only really think of the snakes off the top of my head. If you think of all the sort of lizards that we have in South Africa, the girdled lizards, the flat lizards, the geckos, the skinks, um, sand lizards. Can't think of anything else that is venomous, but a lot of those bites can still do some damage, but not because of envenomation. More to do with the fact that, to be honest, reptiles don't clean their teeth, and there is a build-up of bacteria. And if you are bitten by a reptile, then you can contract some nasty bacteria and things that come from that bite, which can lead to secondary infection. But certainly, in terms of virulent venom, I can only think of the different snake species off the top of my head. Of course, of which there are many, many, but only a few that are specifically dangerous to people, or of medical importance is the way it's often described these days. So you get the hemotoxic venoms that we find in the boomslang and the vine snake or twig snake, cytotoxic venom, which is the cell destroying and necrosis causing venom from generally the things in the viper family, and then the neurotoxic venoms, the cobras and the mambas and the elapids. Although all snakes have a sort of a concoction of venom, generally speaking, certain families will have more of one than the other, which will manifest in that particular way. There are, of course, exceptions to every rule. The berg adder being one that has neurotoxic venom as opposed to cytotoxic. But generally speaking, good word of advice: do not pick up a snake, even if you think you know what it is, because about 90-something% of snake bites happen to people who are either trying to pick them up or are trying to kill them, because the snake will obviously defend itself. If you let it be, it will, more often than not, 99 times out of 100, it will try and get out of your way. The iguana. The Komodo dragon also has a sort of venom within its saliva, I believe, Hoodsbroat. Again, don't know too much about it, but I'm pretty sure that has a way of envenomating its prey from a bite. But they don't have venom glands in their teeth where they actually physically inject a substance from the glands through hollow teeth or through grooves in the teeth that we would expect to see in snakes. Just doing a quick little bit of looking in the background, and it seems that monitor lizards may indeed have what is called a dental gland as opposed to a venom gland, so something associated with the teeth. I need a bit more time to look into that, something I might do this afternoon. But not exactly the same as a snake's venom gland, and certainly the method in which it is injected into any potential prey is a little bit different. Love the delicacy of those little limbs, those tiny little toes, little claw-tipped toes that we can certainly see on the front, and you can see it in a nice substrate tracks of a lizard. You'll often get the swishing, sort of cutting motion of a lizard's tail when it runs across, and then you'll just get little scuff marks, and the tail drag will be what gives it away. But if the lizard is just walking casually and doing what we would consider its natural gait, you'll see those front feet very, very nicely. The back feet tend to drag because they have a tendency to drag their back legs across the ground when they're walking. You can see the way it's splayed out to the back there. But really, really nice to see those toes in the correct substrate. Yeah, it was a nice little cameo from our, not quite 100% what type of lizard, but very nice to see a lizard, something a little bit different, and a beautiful close-up of him or her. But let's go up to Zimbabwe to Vic Falls and see what's going on that side. We've had some lovely activity at Victoria Falls Safari Lodge, the waterhole, with marabou storks and vultures over the last few days. Let's see what's hanging out there today. And there they are. Our selection of marabou storks again. A couple of vultures. Looks like possibly a white-backed in the centre there. We'll have to get a closer look to be sure. See if we can get a closer look. No, it looks like a hooded vulture. You can see that much smaller beak. Difficult to gauge size when standing next to the marabou. I actually thought the vulture was behind the marabou. It just shows what perspective can do. Everyone picked up and dropped something. You can find a little morsel to eat. Fiddling around with something, a little beetle perhaps, some sort of aquatic invertebrate. Very, very varied diet. So from pretty much everything, even unfortunately human rubbish, eaten by marabou storks. Very much a scavenging bird. Doesn't seem too interested with whatever that was he's got there. Flashing vulture again. We saw one of these yesterday, just having a bit of a wing stretch, possibly absorbing some of the sunlight. Ooh, what have you got? Oh, I thought these looked like a chicken drumstick or something, but I think that was just a twig that he'd found. Afternoon, Jeffrey. Thanks for your question there. How big are marabou storks compared to cory bustards? Um, well, I suppose it depends if you're referring to height or weight. The marabou stork is a taller bird. They can get up to about 1.5 meters tall, which is pretty massive if you think about it. But they don't weigh a huge amount. A few kilograms certainly. The cory bustard, not quite as tall. If memory serves, just over a meter, I would think, looking at it, some of the big males. But it's a much more solidly built bird, a lot heavier, and as I'm sure many of you know, the heaviest flying bird in the world. So in terms of weight, the cory bustard, much, much heavier. I would think at least double the weight of a marabou stork. But height-wise, not too much in it. We'll give that one to the stork. Very rarely will you hear marabou storks making much noise. They're not really known for any sort of particular call, but what they do, as many of the larger bird species do, particularly the storks, is what's called bill clapping as a form of communication. So they will snap their bills together and make a noise of the two mandibles colliding with one another, and that is used as a type of communication. So we call it bill clapping. A little bit of feather maintenance going on. We were discussing that the other day here. We can see a little bit more of that activity of zipping the feathers together. You can see them occasionally running the beak along the individual veins of those feathers, just zipping everything back into place. You imagine that certainly a bird like a marabou stork, which has got to weigh probably, I would think, 5 or 6 kilograms. It's an incredible feat to be able to fly in the first place, but it's also an energetic feat. And the better your aerodynamics are, the less energy you're going to expend, and the less the chances of dropping out of the sky, which would not be good if you were a bird. So this feather maintenance, very, very important. See one of our probing ibises there. That looks like a hardy-dar ibis. Probing that bill into the mud under there, looking for little insects and arthropods. Such a little and large scenario going on again. And some dancing vultures. Whilst we're enjoying this little group of vultures here, it seems that we've got a lovely clip to show you from last night that was captured on one of the cameras along the Olifants River of a baby hippo. So let's quickly go along and see what happened last night. Sweet, just a hippo all curled up on the ground there while Mum and I assume a previous offspring has a little bit of a graze. Nice evidence that hippos do indeed come out and graze during the night. Struggling to keep up with Mum, that was a good flop. It'd be quite difficult at that young age to carry around that bulk, much easier in water, of course, with the help of the buoyancy. One of the reasons that a hippo's gestation period is relatively short compared to other animals of similar size. Oh. Looks like a capybara. So because of their predominantly aquatic lifestyle, they do need, or they do have a shorter gestation period because the muscles and the bones don't need to be quite as strong as something like a young rhino, which is going to be on its feet pretty much from day one. But you've got to keep up with Mum. But at least she's close to the shoreline there. Oh, too much again. Nice to see the blacksmith's lapwing there as well. Not normally considered a nocturnal bird, but obviously taking advantage of insects being flushed by these hippos as they move through the grass. The hippo is flat out. Yeah, that was very nice to see. It's great to have all these cameras, but of course, nature is a 24-hour thing, and we do capture some unusual and rather special moments. But lovely to see the next generation of hippo enjoying the Olifants River on the eastern side of South Africa. But we're now back to Tao and our elephants that seem to still be enjoying their drink. seems to have a broken tusk on the left. Of course, that's not unusual. More commonly seen in males than it is in females. How she wouldn't have done that from fighting, unlikely at least. Generally, elephant cows don't engage in battles like the males do. So possibly in the process of feeding, maybe she was trying to lever it over something. The broken tip of the tusk. He's standing around fairly motionless. Well, no one seems to be drinking, no one's feeding, everyone's just enjoying a bit of a break. Of course, elephants can sleep standing up as well. Seen some very funny things over the time of particularly the bull elephants, kind of leaning against a tree with their eyes closed. I once saw one holding a guarri branch and occasionally was swishing flies away from his mouth. A nice little cameo of elephants using tools, having its own little fly swat. Female seems to have a little habit of resting her trunk on that broken tusk. That trunk, of course, does weigh quite a lot, and despite all the muscles there, it's a good thing to relax it occasionally. You do sometimes see them lying their trunks on the ground. Remember, that trunk can almost double in length when it's completely extended, and you'll often see, particularly the big males, having their trunks draped over one of their tusks just to lessen some of the load. Nasty kick out from the zebra there. They are so quite cantankerous things. Often capable of shattering a lion's skull with a well-placed kick. So don't underestimate a zebra. Sharp hooves, a huge amount of force in those back legs. It's like these elephants are waiting for something. They're lined up at the beginning of a race, just waiting for someone to say, go! And they'll pile into the water. Strange, with the water being so close, you normally expect the youngsters to be very excited about things. They often have to be held back by the adults, particularly when approaching water. As you can see, this one here seems to be quite content. And the other one's even facing away, I think, enjoying a bit of shade produced by Mum, but that's quite a young one on the left there. We can just see his bum sticking out. It's strange, it doesn't. I mean, they've obviously had a bit of a mud bath. You can see from the darker coloration covering the more reddish soil, but I don't see any obvious examples of sort of wet patches on the trunks or the legs to suggest that they've been into the water. Question from Metro. Thank you, Metro. can places like Tempe have too many elephants, and are there times where the reserve has to control the population? Yes, there is very much a case for there being too many elephants in one place. The thing is with elephants, they are naturally relatively migratory is the wrong word, but they do cover very, very large distances, and they may have a migratory pattern over the course of the year between feeding grounds, memories of matriarchs, and what we as humans tend to do is put fences and barricades and blockades up, or have areas which are particularly dangerous to elephants, which they soon learn and they want to avoid. And if you put something as big as an elephant that eats as much as an elephant and is capable of causing as much damage to the environment as an elephant in a single place, and don't let it roam freely, then yes, you can have too many elephants, and you'll have a knock-on effect of the biodiversity of that area. Being a keystone species, they have the ability to completely change the vegetation in an area. So if you have lots and lots of trees and you put lots and lots of elephants in there, in a relatively short amount of time, you will have few trees left, and your area will be dominated more by grasslands, because elephants knock over trees. And so they do eat a huge amount of vegetation, and they can reduce the amount of food for other animals. So unfortunately, yes, population control is required. If, say, we didn't put fences up and we let the animals roam free, nature would quite contently find its balance through availability of resources, through disease, through natural events like famines and floods, would keep a check on the populations. But as soon as we put a fence around anything, and it doesn't matter whether it's the size of a football pitch or the size of a small country, if you're going to contain those animals within a given area, then ultimately there will be some form of management strategy that needs to be employed. Now, there are lots of ways that that's been done. Of course, the very famous culling of elephants that's happened in the Kruger National Park over the years, and other reserves, seen by some as an unpleasant thing to do, but it is for the benefit of the entire ecosystem rather than a single species. The issue with that was always, what is the correct amount of elephants? How can you possibly calculate that? That's a very difficult thing to say, because there are so many different variables. It's going to have an effect based on the geology and ultimately the vegetation, the foodstuff of those elephants in a given area. For a long time in Kruger, they were trying to hold the population at around about 13,000 elephants. Now the population is well in excess of 20,000 elephants. And if you go into Kruger, you can certainly see the impact of that. A lot of fallen trees, a lot of damage being done to vegetation. Now, that is not always such a bad thing, because it does create micro habitats for smaller organisms. And in fact, they did a bit of a research project in Kruger a few years ago where they cordoned off some areas to keep elephants out, and then did some species counts, and they found a huge percentage more smaller things like reptiles living in the areas where elephants were, because by elephants pushing over trees, creating shelter, uprooting the roots, which makes lots of little holes and tunnels, and that benefited a lot of the smaller animals there. So swings and roundabouts. Culling is, of course, the most extreme way of doing it. As unpleasant as it may sound, there are a lot of other initiatives these days, such as elephant contraception, which is employed by a lot of reserves in South Africa and surrounding areas as well. And that's done by the use of a chemical or a substance known as PZP, which was originally extracted from pigs, I believe. And it's injected into the cows, and that basically stops them from falling pregnant. So they will still mate, they'll still come into estrus. If I recall, what it does is create a sort of a blockage around the ovum, around the egg, so the sperm cannot penetrate into the egg to actually fertilize it. So everything else happens in the same fashion. Mating still occurs, sperm is transferred, but the female just will not fall pregnant. And the nice thing about PZP is that it's not a long-term thing. It's not like a hysterectomy. It'll have an efficacy period of a year or two, and then would need to be re-administered to those cows for that to continue. So the ability to fall pregnant can be controlled to some extent. You can stop it for a year or two, and then if the population is in a position where it can be increased again, you can withhold that PZP, and hopefully the females will be able to, let's say, father some offspring. That would be the wrong word. Will be able to fall pregnant and produce young. So thanks, Metro. Yeah, good question, and lots of answers to it, as there always is. Um, but ultimately, and it's a question we get asked an awful lot as guides: how do we feel about culling and so on and so forth? And you almost don't really want to get involved with it because someone's going to have very, very strong opinions of it. I don't like the idea of it, but I have to hold my hand up and say that for the benefit of an ecosystem, sometimes it is required, extreme measures are required because it is us that has affected those areas and we need to manage them. I do fully believe that if we just left nature to get on with it itself, it would quite happily regulate. The problem is that takes time, and humans like to do things quickly. As we've discussed, you imagine if you are the owner of a reserve and you want to see some sort of financial return for your investment, then you don't want to wait 10 generations for things to settle. You want to see it quickly, and that's a bit of a problem. It's something we need as humans to remember, that nature takes its time and it shouldn't be for financial gain. It should be for the enjoyment and the beauty of watching scenes just like this. See, thanks, Lee, for this question. Can elephants swim through the ocean? Well, I don't think they'd be able to cross the Atlantic, for example, or the Indian Ocean. But yes, elephants doesn't happen very often, but elephants have been seen swimming in the sea, on some of the coast regions of Africa, down on the sort of KZN area, and also Indian elephants, and I believe one and some of the subcontinent, the Asian elephants in general. So yes, it doesn't happen all that often because, and I'm not sure about the how the salt content would affect them, but they're certainly capable of it. And then elephants, as we said earlier, are actually very efficient swimmers, as most mammals are. Something that I would love to see. Imagine walking along the beach and seeing an elephant frolicking in the waves. That would be pretty impressive. But not unusual to see elephants swimming across rivers and things in certain areas. Doing a quick scan here. I mean, there are reports of elephants that are able or that have swum miles and miles, sort of tens of miles, or at least around about 10 miles. And one even in Sri Lanka that was rescued from the ocean 10 miles from shore. Can you believe that? He must have got very, very lost. But it will be interesting to know how the salt content affects them. Obviously, it's not going to permeate through the skin. A lot of things that do live in saltwater environments have got the ability to get rid of salt. We see that in a lot of ocean birds. They have specialized glands which is able to sort of remove salt. I imagine it'll be fairly uncomfortable on the skin. It may have an effect in terms of drying out the skin, forming a sort of crust on the surface, but it'll be interesting to find out more. But not something that we normally see. Most elephants obviously restricted to more inland areas, but certainly has been recorded. It's a very slow-paced day for this group of elephants. We saw one have a little drink just now. And again, you can see the big female there also resting her trunk on her tusk. This one's decided that maybe he's going to have a little quench. Everybody seeming very sedate. Bunching together, trying to keep, well, I would say trying to keep warm, but that wouldn't make sense. Not like huddling penguins. You can see the ears going, flapping to just help the body cool down. Interesting they're so sort of close together. I think everybody's just having a real rest and bunching together for safety more than anything, because people aren't paying, or they're not paying a huge amount of attention to their surroundings. Right, having a bit of scratch on his friend, or relative. This one's applying some war paint. Looks like a giant bird may have sat on his head. Slightly, you're asking, have I ever witnessed an elephant herd mourning a member of the group? I've never actually witnessed it firsthand. I have seen elephants sort of milling around close to a very old carcass, well, not even a carcass, some bones, picking them up, investigating them, but never sort of a fallen comrade. I have seen, a few dead elephants over the years that have succumbed in fights with other elephants or particularly bad injuries, but I've never seen members come and actually sort of investigate a relatively fresh carcass, if we can put it like that. But of course, we know that it's very well documented that elephants do seem to have some form of understanding of death and fallen comrades. I know there's some very heartwarming stories of mothers carrying babies sort of across their tusks, for days after the baby has passed away. But it is a very strange experience, and one that, to be honest, I'm not qualified to explain. or to put into words. It really is one of those things that you need to experience to fully understand. But even seeing elephants when they are standing around and just moving bones around and manipulating it, there isn't a strange air in the air, a strange feeling of sort of solace and loss in emotion. They are such emotive, soulful things, elephants, and it's so difficult to explain without actually seeing it firsthand. Um, but they just give off this air of sadness at times in that sort of situation. So yeah, I've never seen one actually mourning an individual that has recently passed away, but I've certainly have seen elephants showing respect to long departed friends, put it that way. I think one of the most sort of emotional things I've experienced was actually when I was working down in KwaZulu Natal at a lodge called Tunda. And this was displayed by animals that I never really considered up to that point to be great showers of emotion, and that was giraffe. I mean, I've told this story before on WildEarth when I was out there, but it's one that will always stick in my brain. We came to a big open area, which was, yeah, where we often did see giraffe. There were a lot of acacias in that area, so it wasn't unusual to see giraffe. But we came around the corner and found this like half moon shape, and there must have been 20, 25 giraffe all lined up, all staring in a particular direction. And we stopped with my guests and we were discussing this strange scene because the giraffes weren't feeding. They were all looking in one direction, and we had no knowledge as to what was going on at the time. But I remember saying to them, "It's strange. They look sad. They look mournful." Um, but when giraffes are all looking in one direction, that's often because there may be, something a predator that they're keeping an eye on. But we couldn't see anything. It's a relatively open area. After a little while, we left them. Oh, I should say there were more and more sort of streaming out. Every few minutes, another one or two would emerge from the undergrowth and join this sort of what looked like a vigil at the time. So eventually, we decided to sort of investigate, and we drove down to sort of through the clearings and got to the tree line on the other side. And just, yeah, maybe sort of 50 meters into the tree line, we found a pride of lions busy feeding on a young giraffe that they'd obviously caught. And it was just very strange. Suddenly, the penny dropped that evidently this message had been passed that one of the youngsters had fallen, and it was almost as if the giraffe were coming out to, I'm not sure, to pay respect to or to just be a part of this phenomenon. It was just very, very strange. And it was just interesting that we kind of all agreed that the giraffe looked sad, which is not something. Look at this little one at the front there. Not something that you would normally associate with giraffes, but they definitely were eliciting some form of emotion that we were able to pick up on. That was very, very special, and it sort of opened my eyes to the fact that we do tend to pigeonhole animals as being emotional or not emotional, but there's no reason to think that all animals can't display emotion under particular circumstances. The little elephants. This is more cheery than that story. Maybe that's why they were all standing around watching. They were just making sure this little one wasn't getting into any trouble. Sweet little thing. Probably no more than a few months old, that one. If that, a month perhaps. That was very special to have a little elephant emerging from the water there. It's going to run back to the safety of the group now. Seemingly a little bit more activity all of a sudden. We couldn't see what was going on the other side of that ridge. So yeah, maybe they were just waiting for the baby to splash around in the water, and now maybe it's time to move on. Interesting. Nice little deposit being made there on the right-hand side of the screen. Be interesting to see if we see any of the other elephants coming over to investigate it or get any sense from it. Well, perhaps not. Of course, elephant capable of producing around about 100 kilograms of that every day, which is a horrifying thought, but excellent for the environment. Not only is it fertilizing the soil, it's also depositing seeds and pieces of the trees and plants that they've eaten, being given their own little mixture of fertilizer. And you often find things growing out of piles of elephant dung like that, so a great way to disperse seeds from trees. It looks like swim time is over, or waterhole time is over. They disappear into the tree line. Good luck, little one. Enjoy. Those little legs having to catch up with mum again. There's a nice big bull. Good to see the female on the left there, so very probably the matriarch. Judging by the way she's leading the herd, you can clearly see the size difference between an elephant bull just disappearing off to the right now and the big female on the left. Franny J, you're asking about those elephant graveyards. Well, we sort of mentioned them briefly earlier, but no, regrettably, it's not true. Unfortunately, they don't have dying holes like the giraffes in Madagascar. So that whole idea of graveyards came about when bones of elephants were washed up during floods, because the older elephants end up in damper areas because of the type of vegetation they have access to. And during a flood, those bones transported with the water current and then often deposited all in one spot. And when explorers found those, I suppose it was a logical explanation that all of those elephants had died in one place, the stockpile of bones that they saw. But as people sort of get more knowledge and we begin to understand our environment better, we figure out what's actually been going on there, and we see examples of that throughout history. Those of you who know me will know that I do enjoy sort of astronomy and the stars. It made perfect sense back in the day, before people had any understanding of science and physics, that it was the sky that was moving and everything was going around the Earth and not us. I mean, imagine the change in mentality to appreciate that the thing that we live on is actually a blob in a big black void which is rotating and moving around another object. I mean, that's a huge step for somebody to even consider, let alone believe or understand the mechanics and the physics of it. But that's the beauty of discovery. That's what science is. It's observation and then trying to figure out why. Science is the science of asking the question why. And even to this day, we're learning stuff. We were talking about population control in elephants earlier. I mean, a lot of the knowledge that we have in terms of environmental management and conservation management it's an ongoing thing. We're constantly learning about it, collating more information. The bigger the sample size, the longer the period of time we have to analyze this data. We can try different methodologies and try and find what works. To some extent, it's trial and error. We don't know the answer to everything. We can't Google everything this day and age, as much as we may try. Amazing how these animals just melt into the undergrowth. A minute ago we had 10, 15 enormous animals collectively weighing probably 100 tons. And even though there are no really big trees, particularly in this area of the Dickway or anywhere on the Dickway, they just disappear. And sometimes you can drive for days without seeing an elephant. It blows your mind how that's possible. Be reminded to be patient in nature. If you've just switched onto this camera now, you think, oh, there's nothing happening. 2 minutes ago, there was a whole bunch of elephants with a little youngster walking past. Find that happening all the time in game reserves that we love as guides, to think that we know what we're doing. And we can certainly make some educated guesses. But an awful lot of the time you're down to luck and being in the right place at the right time. A number of times that, for example, we've been driving down a long straight road within the Kruger National Park, haven't seen anything for a while, and you just happen to glance in your rear view mirror and there's a herd of elephants or a pride of lions crossing the road that you would have missed if you hadn't just looked around at that particular point. So let's never lose faith. There are times when you're out on a game drive with guests, particularly if you've got guests that are absolutely desperate to see something, and you're not seeing anything, you haven't seen anything at all for an hour or so, and it's so hard not to be pessimistic that there's not much happening today, but the chances of something walking out in front of you is exactly the same one moment to the next. And just because it's been a quiet hour or half an hour or 2 hours, it's not to say that it will all change or won't all change in the next couple of minutes. We might have a pride of lions emerge from the bushes and come down and have a drink. Who knows? Canine Girl, you asked a question which I missed. Sorry, I've just noticed it now. Do matriarchs have a sense of which bulls are the best to mate with, and do they have any control over the other female choices? Well, certainly they will choose a male based on what they see. That's why they will generally always go for the biggest, most dominant male. There'll be lots of pheromones involved, but generally speaking, it will be done on sort of confidence and size. Sometimes a female may not be interested, and a male will certainly try his luck. But generally speaking, the male who arrives at the herd has already proved his worth, because he will have bumped into lots of other elephant bulls who are in must, that reproductive state, as he has sort of approached the herd. The female in estrus, the cow, will be giving off the correct pheromones. She'll be releasing that sort of must rumble, that infrasound, which is inaudible to us, but all the other elephants in the area will have picked up on that, and they'll all sort of slowly start congregating towards the epicenter of those chemical and audible signals. And the elephants bump into one another. Generally speaking, by the time you get to the female who is producing that sound, that will be the biggest, most dominant elephant who's scared off any potential other suitors. So she will have, they do have a sense of which ones are best. I don't know if it's ever been recorded that the same male and the same female will have copulated repeatedly. It probably has, because of the fact that they generally will stay within that home range. So there may be some sort of recognition and knowledge, but they certainly don't form pairs for life, for example. I'm not 100% sure what you mean when you're asking, do they have any control over the other females' choices? I assume you're meaning in terms of from a mating perspective. Whether or not the matriarch is able to influence the decision-making process of the other females within the group, that I'm not sure. But because of the closeness of elephant society, there will certainly probably be messages being passed between. But I would have thought that if the matriarch, for example, accepts a bull as good reproductive stock, then the rest of the herd will think the same thing. That would be my assumption. It's a nice little bird activity here at Tau as well. We had a yellow-billed duck a little bit earlier, some red-billed teals, and one of our black-winged stilts here. Patrolling the shoreline, looking for little insects and arthropods in the water and the mud. Looking for Smith lapwings over there as well. And having a little leg shake. Had a good time for a bath as well. Like the elephants at the beginning of the show, the lapwings decided it's just going to lie in the water for a little bit. Good splash around, good way to cool off. We saw earlier also sort of digging around in the feathers on his back just above the base of the tail. That will be accessing the uropygial gland or preen gland, which of course is that lovely concoction of oils which helps to waterproof the feathers. Making full use of that right now. Most birds do have that gland, but there are exceptions. Herons, for example, and doves, parrots have rather what's called powder down, which are specialized feathers that grow on the chest that are constantly growing, and they flake off to create this little powder, which is then administered by the bird to the rest of the feathers. Has the same basic effect, just helps with antimicrobial activity and keeping the feathers in good condition. There we go. Try off some of those feathers again. And a nice little dip. And the other one's just watching on. Strange no one else has taken the opportunity. Shake your tail feather. Everybody having a good clean today, but that would be normal this time of day, afternoon. It's very hot. You don't want to expend unnecessary energy. Most animals, particularly birds, far more active dawn and dusk, spend the heat of the day doing exactly these sort of maintenance things that always need to be completed. This is as good a time as any to do it. Oh, I still saw something. Changed its mind for a strike. Oh, no, and again. That's a little family of Egyptian geese. You can see the adults there at the back, and these, I suppose we call them goslings still, but sort of sub-adults by now, looking at their coloration and their size. A bit of some disputes, some ducking and diving. Kids will be kids. Mum just hanging out on the peripheries, letting them get on with it. Rachel, what determines whether birds are ground or tree nesters? Um, well, I suppose evolution has done it really. A lot of it would be dependent upon habitat and diet requirements. Um, Obviously, tree nesters, generally speaking, well, they have what are called altricial. So anything that nests in a tree has the added safety of being up into the air and away from most other predators, so they can afford a little bit more time for development. So shorter incubation times, a little bit more parental care. They're fairly, I'm sure you've seen bird nests in your garden, these tiny little, mostly bald things screaming for food. We've actually got a nest I saw in the garden here in England the other day of little robin chicks, very, very cute, stashed away in a bush somewhere. Um, so they take a little bit more time before they've fledged and leave the nest. The big difference between ground nesting birds is their precocial nature, because they are far more danger from predators being found. It's important that those birds are able to be mobile very, very quickly and to look after themselves. So generally speaking, ground nesting birds are, as soon as they've hatched, they're able to move around so that they can evade potential predators. Lots of other differences in terms of sometimes the shapes of the eggs, often more rounded ones on the ground, more sort of that classical piriform egg shape. For tree nesting birds, designed so those eggs don't roll out of the nest. And generally speaking, ground nesting birds have a lot more camouflage on their eggs because they're out in the open. But quite what dictates whether they're going to be tree or ground nesting birds is sort of a difficult one to answer. It depends on their reproductive or the strategy that they have evolved. But all in response to predators and habitat, potential dangers, I should say, and habitat preference. Nice to see some more elephants. We had a day the other day where we didn't see any elephants at all, which is quite unusual. Often do like to come down for a drink during the heat of the day, particularly the bulls. So normally I expect a huge amount of elephant activity at Tower Waterhole from my experiences of being there. So nice to see a little bit more over the last few days. A couple of young bulls again here by the look of it. Nice to see the behaviour of the elephant there, grabbing that little forb, whatever that was, growing there, and then using his foot to break it off. It's often the way that elephants feed. A lot of the stuff growing here wouldn't be of particularly nutritional value. I suppose it's what we would sort of more consider a weed. But remember, there are lots of chemicals in there, and elephants, as we know, are most capable of self-medicating, knowing what their body requires and where to find those certain substances. So they may not have them in huge amounts, but if the body does need something in there, they're usually able to identify particular scents of certain chemicals and will eat things on demand, on request. Always lovely when you see all the zebras lined up like this, particularly if you get a whole group all standing side by side having a drink. And if you can get on the opposite side of the bank there, it makes for a spectacular photograph. Raymond, it is wonderful, isn't it, how these animals can live together in harmony. We've got elephants, we've got wildebeest, we saw a kudu earlier, got lots and lots of zebra, all the birds. Yeah, we haven't seen any kerfuffling between any of the different species, all tolerating one another. You often get that around waterholes. There's sort of a mutual respect shown that this is an important resource. Um, you even see it with predators sometimes. If lions are lying next to the waterhole during the heat of the day, the animals are a little bit more comfortable with that. And they'll be wary, certainly, that some animals will still come down to drink, and the lions will sometimes leave them alone. But hey, all these creatures have existed or coexisted for many millions of years. They're pretty used to one another now. Mandy Tillipal, are ruminants capable of vomiting? I would assume they are, but it's not something you see very often, certainly. They're obviously constantly regurgitating those substances from the rumen, which contains an awful lot of fluid and all the microorganisms in there. I have seen rhino vomit, I've seen various hindgut fermenters vomit, but not very common in ruminants as far as I understand, but I'm really not 100% sure. I'm just trying to think. I don't remember really hearing or seeing even cows do it. I would imagine that a lot of the stuff that would otherwise be vomited would be dealt with in one of those four chambers of the stomach. But good question. Not 100% sure on that one. And there's some warthogs. You haven't seen some warthogs yet today. And the nanny. Well, you've asked me to explain how we know about how migratory birds know. Scratching his bum on the neck. How migratory birds know when and where to go. That, uh, Nanny, is one of life's many mysteries. We still don't fully understand. We understand how birds navigate and how they're able to find their way, but quite how they know that they should do it is one of those sort of mysteries. It's obviously all done in response to seasonal changes, length of day, ambient temperatures, so on and so forth. But how they've got such good compasses is a bit of a mystery. There's lots of different ways that they find their way. Some use the stars, some use visual cues, some use hearing. They will also use sense of smell, using the magnetic field lines of the Earth. There are lots of ways that we know that birds are able to find their way, but how exactly they know when and precisely where to go, we're still not 100% sure of, to my knowledge at least. There was an interesting study that was done back in the 70s about birds navigating from a migratory perspective using the stars, where they put some birds in these sort of plastic tubs lined with ink and kind of blotting paper at the right time of migration. I think it was a type of bunting, if I recall. And they put them in a planetarium and put the stars up above them, and they recorded the direction in which all the birds were trying to take off, and most of them were indeed migrating towards the south, which they'd obviously seen by looking at the patternings of the constellations of the stars in the night sky, and they wanted to see how much the birds really relied on this. So then they sort of manipulated what was being seen in the planetarium roof, and they were able to change the direction in which these birds were taking off, which gives credence to the fact that birds were navigating during the stars. We now know that they're not able to identify a particular star and aim for it, but what they can see is the way that the sky rotates. So the southern and the northern celestial poles, that point in the sky that doesn't change, the North Star in the northern hemisphere and the southern celestial pole, everything rotates around that point. That's the axis of rotation of the Earth. And birds are able to see that rotation, the smaller circles closer to the axis of rotation, and able to take a bearing off that. So pretty cool to see that the birds are able to navigate using the night sky as well. But how they actually find, say, a specific nest, we get things like the Wahlberg's eagle in South Africa that comes back every year, an intra-African migrant, and they will usually come back to the same nesting site. How they remember, very difficult to say. Nice to see these warthogs there having a roll around in the mud. This one looks as if she's getting herself a nice little bed to lay down in, digging herself a little depression there. There we go. That snout perfectly designed for shifting earth. Of course, that's one of the ways that they do like to feed. They go for the rhizomes, which are kind of the grass roots. So you'll often see them uprooting the grass to get to the roots with that flat face. In this occasion, we've just made ourselves a nice little mud bath. Little one skipping around. Just look like you've had a roll in the mud. I think you should join in. One's going to have a good scratch against that rock, I would think. No, not that one. He's a rather bold youngster on his own. I'm sure where the rest of the family are. We did see a couple of younger ones earlier. This one's obviously going on a bit of an exploring mission. Looks like a little girl as well. Normally you see the boys are the ones who will go off exploring, maybe looking for a nice little patch of grass or grass roots. Oh, that was all too scary. On back to the safety of the rest of the group. A bit far away. I think that little warthog got a fright with the approaching zebra. But good for you for going out on your own, even if briefly. Much activity at the weaver nest, but very much the wrong time of year at the moment, of course. Many birds, breeding during the summer months. It's incredible architecture nonetheless. And we've been lucky enough to quite a few weavers construct their nests over the years. It's amazing how they do it. Start with their little attachment point, and they'll create like a ring which they use to sit on, and from that construct the back part of the nest, and then finally the little entrance hole. Of course, every weaver species makes a different type of nest, so it is possible with a reasonable amount of accuracy to identify a weaver nest based on its architectural structure. Amazing how they have different knots that they use, and that intricate ability and genetic knowledge of how to fasten them and how to keep them stable and secure. It's quite amazing. Dexterity shown by such a small animal. Another elephant having a bit of a paddle. Nice to see. Hopefully it'll lie down and have a roll around like the ones that we saw right at the beginning of the show. We're sort of into the last 10 minutes or so now. So again, a nice way to round it off with closure. Try and get some of that greener grass there perhaps, and stretching his trunk out in front of him. Anything worth having there? Don't often actually see elephants sort of eating this grass and these the plant matter in water, which is a bit strange in hindsight. You think that'd be nice and soft and much greener and more palatable, but perhaps again, presence of some chemicals dissuading them. A Pumalanga girl from Dorset. Ah, that's exactly where I am, currently sitting in Dorset, asking why the rocks in the background are so red and the rocks around the waterhole here are white. It's just the presence of different minerals within the soil. What normally happens, particularly on these flatter areas, is a lot of the stuff gets leached away into the waterhole itself, but it ultimately comes down to the geology of the area and the rock types that have built those more volcanic ridges. I wouldn't like to say off the top of my head precisely which rock types that we're looking at, but here we've got more of a clay-based soil, less mineral rich than you see in the backgrounds. It's all to do with the minerals that are actually in the soils. Lady wanting to know, do crocodiles try and attack elephants? It has happened before, but it doesn't happen very often. A young elephant, yeah, absolutely would potentially be in danger of a laying in wait crocodile. There have been occasions where crocodiles have grabbed hold of elephants' trunks, but the elephant is so strong that I think it's not much of a match, put it that way. And very, very rarely would a young elephant be down at the water on its own. We saw earlier the protective nature of elephant herds, particularly around water, because they are very much aware of that as a potential risk. You'll find very rarely that a young elephant will be allowed to go and frolic in the water without very, very careful supervision. So, is it possible? Absolutely. Does it happen very often? No. Well, we spent a lovely long time there at Tau Game Lodge, up at their waterhole in Madikwe. I think we're going to go over and have a look at Narrated on the eastern side of the country for the last few minutes. Oh, maybe we won't. Let's stay at Tau for a little longer. Okay, I think rather we're going to head down to the Western Cape area around Betty's Bay. Let's go and see what's happening at Stony Point. We've got a gull and A couple of cormorants. One of our black-backed gulls or kelp gulls, by the look of it. Again, my knowledge of seabirds is not as good as perhaps some other areas of the country, but I shall go with kelp gull off the top of my head. We do get a whole variety of different gulls along the coastlines of South Africa. Many of them, well, around about 8 or 10, I would think, off the top of my head. Some of them are quite distinctive, but I would imagine this is a kelp gull, one of the most common. The other possible, I know we get a black-backed gull. Not sure of its distribution. No, only more on the eastern side of the country, so very likely to be a kelp gull. Assuming the bigger one at the back of the cormorants is a white-breasted cormorant. We also do get a Cape cormorant, but that's a lot smaller and has more sort of reddish orange around the face. So I'm guessing the one possibly at the bottom lying in the rocks there is a Cape cormorant. And that looks very much like a white-bellied cormorant having a group. But we are almost out of time, only a couple of minutes left. So for those of you who have joined us, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed it. We've seen some more wonderful things and some great discussions. Thanks for all of your questions and comments as always. Dark Main Lover, I'm glad you've enjoyed the Live at the Waterhole show, and everybody else. It really is a pleasure. This is my 5th day of doing it. And that's me done for now. I'll hopefully be back again sometime in May. Very much looking forward to it, but it's been wonderful to spend some time with everybody. Maria, you're very welcome. I'm glad you also enjoyed it. And yeah, a lot of time spent up in Madikwe today. Elephants, I think, have stolen the show. I think for me, again, my highlight of the day was watching that elephant very early on. I think it was back at Jamala, who decided to have a full-on swim, but roll around in the mud. That was very special. And that little elephant that we saw at Tau. Yeah, we are almost done. So wherever you've been joining us from, thank you very much. I hope you'll stick around and watch the afternoon drive with the guys at Juma and Amakala. Catch up with all the activity happening in those areas. But wherever you are, have a fantastic rest of the day. And don't forget to join us again tomorrow at the same time for more Live at the Waterhole. Even the girls bowing goodbye.